As the whole world was focusing on Wagner and Russia and how Wagner almost destabilized Russia, many people missed the fact that Wagner is destabilizing the country of Mali, and things are starting to heat up in the country of Mali. Now, stick with me in this video because a lot of people thought Wagner would essentially collapse and not have any operations in Africa. I was one of those people, but what you need to realize is that Mali is essentially becoming fully dependent on Wagner to protect Mali, and they're paying Wagner quite a lot of money to make things happen. So again, stick with me in this video because things are heating up in Mali, and it's also affecting operations in Africa within the US Special Forces. Okay, so here's what's going on. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that the UN is being kicked out of Mali for peacekeeping operations. Now, this doesn't seem right and this seems odd. Why wouldn't a country who has a lot of turmoil and a lot of destabilization, why wouldn't they want the UN in there to help protect the country and to help make sure that citizens are safe, to make sure kids can go to school? This doesn't make sense. Now, the speculation is this. Many people are pointing the fingers at Wagner, more specifically the head of Wagner, and the main reason for this is because why would Mali kick out the UN but doesn't kick out Wagner? That doesn't make sense. Also, we have reports that Wagner is making about $200 million to be operating within Mali. So Wagner has a very strong stake in the country of Mali. They're making a lot of money, but they're also gaining a lot of power in this African country. Now, we can also speculate what Mr. Prigozhin is trying to do, head of Wagner, is trying to befriend all government officials within Mali. Now, to be fair, Wagner is really good at their job in Mali, but that's because they're essentially able to do whatever they want, as in like defending the country and securing the country. Mali loves Wagner, don't get me wrong. Now, as far as Mr. Prigozhin, we do know that he likes to befriend heads of state, special forces commanders. That's how he was able to get entire units to turn in with Wagner and to march over to Moscow. Obviously that fell apart, but we know he has a lot of influence. So it wouldn't be out of the question that Wagner is trying to gain influence within Africa, because Africa, there's a lot of money to be made for these military companies and these military groups to try making a quick coin from these countries. But what Wagner does is they gain influence, and they're essentially gaining a stronghold in Africa where they have a lot of influence and where they can make the United States actually look really bad. And again, we'll get to all of that. So here's where things get complicated, because the UN had about 14,000 personnel who were operating within Mali, and that's a significant force to help defend your country. Reason being is because when you look at the breakdown of how many fighters Mali has, plus the Wagner fighters, it's really not that much. And again, this doesn't make sense how Mali all of a sudden wanted to kick out this big force without the influence of Wagner. But nonetheless, we have about 20,000 active duty troops with the Mali professional military. You have 2,000 Air Force, and then you have about 15,000 National Guard troops or reserve troops. But then you add that on top of 1,000 Wagner fighters. This is not the biggest fighting force ever. And to cut your fighting force almost in half by getting rid of the UN, again, things are not lining up here. One thing the UN does when they operate in a country is that they will call you out if you're doing something wrong on all levels. Government, non-government, doesn't matter. So the thing is this, the highlighted portion here says, Mali's government was angered by the UN report in May, which accused the army and armed white men of taking out 500 civilians in a town. And Mali got mad about this and said we had nothing to do with this. And essentially this was the catalyst to get the UN out of Mali if Mali, quote unquote, is going to be reporting this news on Mali and making us look bad. Now, here's why everyone is worried, and here's why many people speculate that Mali will rely on Wagner and will start paying Wagner more money, give Wagner more influence, and all of a sudden Prigozhin is literally in charge of an entire African nation. Again, in the highlighted portion, the situation could worsen when the mission departs, leaving Mali's under-equipped army alone with about 1,000 Wagner fighters to combat militants who control swaths of territory in the desert, north, and center. So again, this is a Wagner tactic to essentially deplete their allies' forces, or to make their allies' forces rely on them. As we saw when they operated in Ukraine, Russia was relying heavily on Wagner to make a lot of pushes, especially in the Battle of Bakhmut. And of course, Wagner turned on Russia, so who's to say Wagner won't turn on Mali, or at least make it seem like, Mali, we're here for your best interest, but give us that 200 million, maybe you need to give us a little more money because now we need more ammunition. You see where I'm going here? Okay, so the map next to me is Africa, and you have highlighted countries. Now, the countries I want you to focus on are Mali, Nigeria, and Niger. And essentially, this whole portion over here in the northwestern regions of Africa, or the Sahara. Now, the thing is this, as we know, Wagner is operating in Mali and the UN is leaving Mali. So now we're going to have a hotspot for militant groups who want to work out of Mali. In fact, these highlighted red portions are active insurgency areas, and this map was made January 4th, 2023. So again, this could be probably a little more updated, but this is rather accurate. Now, the thing is this. The U.S. Special Forces in the United States, they're operating out of Niger and Nigeria. And so you have a weird dichotomy of Wagner pushing militants into Niger, the U.S. Special Forces pushing militants into Mali, and both forces are making one another look bad. Wagner is saying, look, they can't handle what's happening in Niger, Special Forces can't handle what's happening in Niger, and the Special Forces are saying, look, Wagner can't handle what's happening in Mali, and you have a bunch of militant groups meeting in the middle, and unfortunately the people who are suffering the most are the citizens of Mali, Niger, Nigeria, etc. And the reason why the United States cares so much to be operating in these regions is because the United States likes to go after militant groups instead of letting the militant groups come after them. And if we know that Mali is a hot spot for militant groups and Wagner is not allowing U.S. Special Forces to work with Wagner or to fight these militant groups, the U.S. Special Forces feel like they have their hands tied behind their backs, and the United States feels like, look, we are at the mercy of Wagner. Whatever they do in Mali, if they're pushing groups into Niger or Nigeria, that's the only way we can fight these groups. But the issue is that they're also pushing civilians into countries, and now we're having to navigate how we're going to deal with these civilians. We don't want to hurt anybody, but we also want to help people. And now that the UN is not going to be able to work in Mali, the UN was a major part in facilitating how to help these towns get well water, to make sure everything is done properly, and that Wagner was not able just to operate freely. Now that the UN is out of Mali, we're probably going to see more of an uptick of Wagner doing whatever they want to get rid of these militant groups. Because again, the reason why this is a little confusing is that Wagner, they are the good guys and the bad guys at the same time. Wagner is trying to do the best they can, is so that Mali becomes dependent on Wagner, and then Wagner essentially could create their own coup, and then destabilize Mali, and then now they're in charge of the country of Mali within Africa. So I hope you're understanding the severity of the story and how the coup in Russia almost became irrelevant. In fact, I'm almost willing to bet the coup in Russia, or Wagner doing what they did to Russia, was almost a scapegoat to get their forces out of Ukraine and to focus on Africa. The money is in Africa, and for many years, hundreds of years, people have always taken advantage of Africa because of their natural resources, because of how nice the people are, and how they are willing to work with foreign entities in exchange for money, in exchange for security. And Wagner is just doing the old school playbook of colonization within Africa. That's all they're doing. This has been done before, but unfortunately, it works for countries who are destabilized, and it works for countries who are becoming dependent on you. Because again, I am not saying Wagner are the good guys, but they're really good at their job in Mali because they have no rules. They can do whatever they want and kicking militant groups out of their country, but they're also hurting civilians in the process. So anyway, let me know what you guys think of this story. I think it's a rather big deal, and I think we're going to start seeing more and more of action in Africa. The news loves to focus on Ukraine, which it is an important conflict. But for whatever reason, again, stories like this always slide under the rug. We all say Wagner's going to fall apart, but they're making moves in Africa. Who's to say they're not going to push to other countries? And we don't know what the full story of them operating in Sudan is. All we really are hearing about them is really pushing or moving around in Mali, because that seems to be where their cash cow is. Making $200 million is quite a lot of money for any company, but the fact that they would be able to gain power and to have their own little movement and government in Africa, that's a really, really big deal in 2023, and so on. So let me know what you guys think. Leave your comments and opinions down below. This is not a story I like to see or report on, but it is what's happening, and it does affect the United States and the West, because if Wagner is able to do this and to try to stabilize Mali, who's to say they're not going to go and focus on other countries and say, hey, look, if we stabilize Mali, we can stabilize your country, and the United States can't stabilize your country. You should trust us. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. Leave your comments and opinions down below, and we'll see you later.